Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. My name is Henry, and this is the story of how my 13-year marriage crumbled due to an unplanned discovery. Life has a way of throwing things at you when you least expect it, and what happened to me on one ordinary Sunday afternoon changed everything I thought I knew about my life and the woman I'd spent over a decade building a future with. It was a Sunday afternoon around 4:30 in the evening, when my entire world shattered. I remember the exact time because I just glanced at the clock on the cable box, thinking about how we still had a few hours before Virginia's sister was supposed to arrive for dinner. I was sitting in the living room, half watching some basketball game on TV. Virginia had been sitting next to me on the couch just minutes before, scrolling through her phone. Then she got up and went into the kitchen to start cleaning up. I could hear her moving around in there, the clatter of dishes being stacked, the sound of the faucet running. She looked beautiful that day, wearing one of my old college shirts that she'd claimed as her own years ago, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked domestic, comfortable, like the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago when we were both young and stupid and thought we had the whole world figured out. I remember thinking how lucky I was, how good our life was together, how we'd built something solid over 13 years of marriage. That feeling lasted about 5 more minutes before everything fell apart. While I was sitting there watching the game, I noticed Virginia's phone on the side table next to the couch. It was plugged into the charger, and the screen suddenly lit up with a notification. Typically, I wouldn't have looked. Virginia and I had always had an open, trusting relationship. We knew each other's passwords, had access to each other's phones, not because we were suspicious or controlling, but because we had nothing to hide. At least, that's what I thought. The notification was from her sister, Linda, who was supposed to visit us later that evening. The preview on the lock screen showed something about her running late, maybe not making it until after dinner because of traffic or something with her kids. I picked up the phone to read the full message because Virginia would want to know, so that she could adjust dinner plans. If Linda was going to be late, we could push our arrangement back an hour or so. I unlocked the phone with a password I'd always known, the same 4 digits she'd been using for years, and read Linda's full message. It was about traffic on the highway and her son's soccer practice running over. Nothing unusual. I was about to lock the phone and set it back down on the table when something made me pause. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was instinct, or perhaps it was just dumb luck, but something in my gut told me to keep looking. I found myself going through her messaging app, scrolling through the recent conversations. There were the usual suspects, the people Virginia talked to regularly. There was our ongoing conversation, mostly mundane stuff about grocery lists and what time I'd be home from work. There was her sister Linda, her mom, who lived 2 states away, and a group chat with her college friends. Everything looked normal. Exactly what you'd expect to see on your wife's phone. And then I saw it, a message thread that made my stomach clench. The contact name read Mr. David. David was her boss, the CEO of the marketing firm where she'd worked for the past 5 years. I knew him vaguely. We'd met at a couple of company parties over the years, shaken hands, made small talk about sports and the weather, and how the company was doing. He seemed like a typical corporate guy, confident, well-dressed, the kind of man who knew how to work a room. Virginia talked about him sometimes, usually complaining about demanding deadlines or praising a successful campaign they'd worked on together. I'd never thought anything of it. Why would I? She was allowed to have a professional relationship with her boss. But something about seeing his name in her personal messages, separate from any work group chats or team threads, sent up a red flag. I opened the thread. At first, I told myself that it would be work stuff, maybe some coordination about a project or a client meeting. But as I scrolled, the messages went back months, maybe 6 months or more, and they weren't about work. They weren't about deadlines, campaigns, or client presentations. There were messages about meeting up after work, about hotels I didn't recognize, about how exciting and dangerous this all was. Virginia's responses were just as bad because they were in her typing style, the same emojis she used when she texted me. She wrote about how her husband, me, was working late and they could meet up at that place he'd mentioned. I kept scrolling, even though every message felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Some photos were so intimate that I felt sick. From the kitchen, just 15 feet away, I could hear Virginia humming along to a song, the sound of running water, as she washed dishes. She had no idea I was holding the evidence of her betrayal in my hands. I wanted to storm in there, throw the phone at her, scream until my voice gave out. I wanted to demand answers, to ask her how she could do this to me, to us, to our 13 years together. I wanted to know when it started, why it started, if she ever loved me at all, or if our entire marriage had been a lie. But I didn't do any of that. Something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. Perhaps it was some survival instinct that told me that confronting her right now, without a plan or thinking it through, would be a mistake. I carefully locked her phone and set it back on the charger, exactly where I'd found it. I walked to the bathroom, closed the door behind me, and sat down on the edge of the tub, trying to question everything. Had there been signs I'd missed? I started thinking back over the past few months, looking for clues I'd been too blind or too trusting to see. The late nights at work, the new lingerie I'd found in her drawer that I'd assumed was for me, the way she'd been quite distant lately, always on her phone, constantly tired, always making excuses when I tried to initiate intimacy. I'd chalked it all up to stress, to her demanding job, to us being married for over a decade and falling into a comfortable routine. I'd thought it was normal, the kind of thing that happens to every couple after they've been together for a while. I'd been so stupid, so blind, so trusting. How was I going to get through the next few hours without completely falling apart? The days following my discovery were some of the hardest of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal, had to act like I didn't know anything, and it was absolutely torture. Every time Virginia kissed me goodbye before work, every time she told me about her day, every time she made up some excuse about working late, I had to bite my tongue and play along. Inside, I was dying. I needed to be strategic about this, especially if I was going to pursue a divorce. I spent time thinking about my options. I knew that in our state, infidelity could impact divorce proceedings, particularly when it came to asset division and alimony. Virginia earned significantly more than I did. She was a senior executive at her firm, pulling in a six-figure salary. At the same time, I had a decent but much more modest income. If I were going to divorce her, I needed solid evidence that would hold up in court, evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. The messages I'd seen on her phone were damning, but they weren't enough. She could claim they were taken out of context, or she could delete them before I had a chance to document them properly. I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't follow Virginia myself. I had my own job, my own responsibilities, and besides, I'd probably be terrible at it. So I did some research online, found a reputable private investigation firm, and made an appointment. The investigator I met with was professional and understanding. He told me it would take some time. He said maybe a few weeks, and it wouldn't be cheap. I agreed and signed the contract, feeling like I was taking the first real step toward ending my marriage. While I waited for the private investigator to do his work, I kept a close eye on Virginia myself, at least as much as I could, without being obvious. I noted the times she said she was working late, the evenings she came home later than expected, and the weekends she claimed she had to go into the office. I paid attention to her mood, behavior, and interactions with me. She seemed normal, or at least she was good at pretending. But there was a distance between us now, at least on my end. I couldn't look at her the same way. I tried to regain access to her phone about a week after my initial discovery, and I found I could no longer unlock it. Virginia had changed her password. That was another confirmation that she knew I had access and was actively hiding something. The waiting was agonizing. Every day felt like an eternity. I threw myself into work trying to distract myself, but it was hard to focus. I lost weight because I couldn't eat properly. I wasn't sleeping well. I couldn't tell anyone the truth. Not yet. Not until I knew what I was going to do. After what felt like the longest few weeks of my life, the private investigator finally called me. And when I got to his office, he handed me the thick envelope containing his report. I took a deep breath before opening it. The report was comprehensive and honestly devastating. There were photographs of Virginia and David together, entering hotels, leaving restaurants, sitting in his car in parking lots. There were timestamps and dates for everything, a detailed timeline of their affair, all on days when Virginia had told me she was working late or attending work events. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no way she could talk her way out of this or claim it was innocent. She'd been having a full-blown affair with her boss for months, and now I had proof. But the report contained more than just evidence of Virginia's infidelity. The private investigator had also done a background check on David, and what he found was eye-opening. David was married to a woman named Megan. They'd been married for quite a while and had a family together. The investigator had included some basic information about Megan in the short report: her age, background, and interests. What stood out to me was that Megan was an artist, a painter specifically. According to the information gathered, she'd had some success early in her career, but had largely stepped away from her art over the years, presumably to support David's career and raise their family. The investigator had also noted, based on some discreet inquiries and observations, that Megan seemed isolated and lonely. David was always working, always busy, and Megan appeared to be living a life that revolved around everyone else's needs but her own. With the bit of detail I read about Megan, I felt a surge of empathy for her. She was a victim in this situation just like I was. Her husband had betrayed her just as Virginia had betrayed me. She deserved to know the truth about what her husband was doing. I decided to reach out to Megan. The private investigator had included her contact information in the report, so I had her email address and phone number. But actually contacting her was more complicated than I expected. What do you say to a stranger when you're about to turn their world upside down? How do you tell someone that their spouse is cheating without coming across as vindictive or crazy? I spent hours drafting an email, deleting it, starting over. Finally, I settled on something straightforward and compassionate. I introduced myself, explained that I was married to one of David's coworkers, and said that I had information she needed to see. I didn't go into details in the email. I just asked if she'd be willing to meet with me in person so I could share what I'd discovered. I attached one or two of the less explicit photographs from the investigator's report, just enough to make it clear that this was serious. Then I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Megan responded a couple of days later. Her email was brief, but she agreed to meet with me. We arranged to meet. I was unsure of what to expect. Would she even believe me? But when I walked into the coffee shop and saw her sitting at a corner table, I could tell immediately that she was struggling. We sat down, and I walked her through everything. I showed her the full report from the private investigator, explained how I discovered the affair, and answered all of her questions as honestly as I could. Megan listened quietly, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just absorbing the information. I could see the pain in her eyes, but I could also know that she wasn't entirely surprised. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her coffee cup. Then she looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to believe it. She told me about her marriage, about how David had become increasingly distant over the years, how he was always working, always too busy for her and their family. She'd felt invisible in her own life, like she didn't matter. Hearing her say that broke my heart because I understood exactly how she felt. We talked for a long time that day, sharing our stories, our pain, our fears about what came next. By the time we left the coffee shop, we'd exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. Over the following weeks, Megan and I became each other's support system. We texted regularly and talked through our plans for what's next with our spouses. It was comforting to have someone who understood what I was going through, someone who would tell me to just get over it. Megan was brilliant, kind, and stronger than I think she gave herself credit for. As we interacted more and more, I found myself genuinely caring about her well-being, wanting to see her happy and free once again. With everything crystal clear, I consulted with a lawyer. I showed her the private investigator's report, walked her through everything I discovered, and asked her advice on how to proceed. The lawyer carefully reviewed all the evidence and told me that, since Virginia earned significantly more than I did, I might be expecting compensation. The lawyer advised me to be strategic, to document everything, to stay calm and collected, no matter how Virginia reacted when the time came. She started preparing the divorce papers, but told me it would take a little time to get everything in order. We wanted to make sure we had an airtight case. While the divorce papers were being prepared, something unexpected happened. Virginia came home from work one evening and mentioned that one of her colleagues was having an anniversary party that weekend. It was going to be a big celebration with lots of people from Virginia's company, and Virginia asked if I would go with her as her plus one. Under normal circumstances, I probably would have made up an excuse to get out of it. I'd never been a huge fan of Virginia's work events, all that corporate small talk and networking. But this time, something made me pause. I asked Virginia who else would be at the party, trying to sound casual. She rattled off a few names and then mentioned that her boss would be there too. Most of the senior staff were invited, she said. The moment she said David's name, an idea began to form in my mind. Here was an opportunity, a chance to confront both Virginia and David in a public setting, to expose their affair in front of all their colleagues. It was bold, maybe even reckless, but after weeks of living with the knowledge of their betrayal, of pretending everything was fine while I died inside, I wanted to do something. I wanted to take back some control, some dignity. So I told Virginia I'd go to the party with her. She seemed surprised but pleased, probably thinking it was a sign that things were every day between us, that I hadn't figured out what she was doing. Later that night, I texted Megan and told her about the party. I explained that her husband, David, would be there, that Virginia expected me to show up as her supportive husband, and that I had an idea. What if Megan came to the party too? What if we showed up together, made it clear to both David and Virginia that we knew about their affair, that we weren't going to hide or be ashamed? It would be a public statement, a way of showing our cheating spouses that they didn't get to humiliate us anymore. Megan was hesitant at first when I proposed the idea. She worried about making a scene, about what people would think, about how it might affect David or their kids. But I reminded her that David and Virginia were the ones who'd made the choices that led to this moment. They were the ones who betrayed us, who'd carried on an affair without any regard for how it would affect their families. We weren't doing anything wrong by showing up at a party together. If anything, we were taking back some control, some dignity. After thinking it over for a day or two, Megan agreed. We coordinated our plan carefully. The night of Sandra's anniversary party arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Virginia and I got ready separately. She spent a long time on her hair and makeup, and the dress held her frame perfectly. She seemed excited about the party, chatting about who would be there. I just nodded along, giving short responses, trying to keep my anxiety under control. The car ride to the party was tense, at least for me. Virginia didn't seem to notice. She was on her phone for most of the drive, probably texting David or checking work emails. I wondered if she were coordinating with him, making sure they'd have a chance to see each other at the party without being too obvious. We arrived at Sandra's house around 7 in the evening. It was a lovely suburban home with a big backyard where the party was being held. There were string lights hung up everywhere, tables set up with food and drinks, and probably 50 or 60 people already there, mingling and laughing. I recognized some faces from previous company events Virginia had dragged me to over the years. I grabbed a beer from one of the coolers and tried to blend in, making polite small talk with a few people, nodding and smiling at appropriate moments. Virginia stayed close to me for the first part of the evening, playing the role of the devoted wife. Her hand was on my arm, she laughed at jokes, and she introduced me to people I'd never met. I played along, keeping my expression neutral, waiting for the right moment. I spotted David pretty quickly. He was across the yard, holding court with a group of executives. At one point, he glanced over in our direction, and our eyes met for a brief second. He looked away quickly and went back to his conversation. I wondered if he knew that I knew about the affair. Probably not. Virginia had likely kept that information to herself, not wanting to risk David panicking or ending things. When Megan arrived, I excused myself from the party. I told Virginia I needed to take a work call, that it was important, and I'd be back in a few minutes. She barely acknowledged me. She was already deep in conversation with some other colleagues. I walked to meet Megan. This was the moment we'd been planning for, and there was no turning back now. I found Megan sitting in her car, and I could see immediately that she was nervous. I opened the passenger door and leaned in. "Are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this, Henry," she said, her voice shaking. "What if this makes everything worse? What if people judge me? What if David—" I cut her off, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Hey, listen to me. We're not doing anything wrong. They're the ones who should be ashamed, not us. We're just showing up together. That's it. They don't get to humiliate us anymore." She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then nodded more firmly. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's do this." Megan got out of the car, and she looked beautiful that night. She'd dressed up for the occasion, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress and heels. Her hair was down, and despite her nervousness, she held her head high as we walked back toward the party together. As we rounded the corner and stepped into the backyard, I could feel the atmosphere shift immediately. Conversations started to falter. People noticed us, noticed Megan walking beside me, and started whispering to each other. I could see the confusion on their faces as recognition dawned on some of them who knew both couples. The whispers grew louder. Virginia saw me first. She was still standing near the food table with her group of colleagues, and her eyes found me across the yard. Her brow furrowed in confusion, and then she saw Megan beside me. I watched as the color literally drained from her face, as her expression shifted from confusion to shock. She knew who Megan was. She'd probably seen her at company events before, knew she was David's wife. And now here Megan was, at this party, with me. But it was David's reaction that I was really focused on. He was still standing with his group of executives when he glanced over and saw us. His face went completely white, and I could see his jaw clench. He was staring at Megan like he'd seen a ghost, and then his eyes shifted to me, and I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He knew. He knew that I knew. He knew that Megan knew. And he knew that whatever carefully constructed facade he'd been maintaining was about to crumble right there in front of everyone. I walked Megan straight over to the drinks, which were close to where David was standing. The group of executives around him had gone completely silent, sensing that something significant was happening, that there was tension in the air they didn't yet understand. David's face had gone red, and I could see his hands balling into fists at his sides. I could tell he was trying desperately to control his rage, not to make a scene in front of all these people. I stopped right in front of him with Megan at my side, and I leaned in close enough that only he could hear me. My voice was calm, steady, almost conversational. "She's amazing," I said quietly, looking him directly in the eyes. "Thanks for being too blind to see it." David's reaction was immediate, and for a second, I genuinely thought he might take a swing at me. But he didn't. He just stood there, unable to do anything but stare at me with pure hatred in his eyes. The executives around him were watching in stunned silence, clearly trying to figure out what was going on, what they were witnessing. Across the yard, I could see Virginia. She knew exactly what this meant. She knew that her affair was now public knowledge, at least among this group of people, and there was no way to spin it or hide it anymore. After we got the drink and spent some minutes talking with each other, I didn't linger to enjoy David's reaction or to see what Virginia would do. I'd said what I needed to say, and now it was time to leave. I turned to Megan, offered her my arm, and we walked away together. We walked calmly through the house out the front door and down the street to where her car was parked. After she left, I didn't go straight home after leaving the party. I wasn't ready to face Virginia yet because I abandoned her there. I wasn't prepared for the inevitable explosion that was waiting for me. So I drove around for a while. When I finally did go home, it was late. I pulled into the driveway and saw that all the lights in the house were on. So I knew Virginia was waiting for me, probably furious. I took a deep breath, steeled myself for what was coming, and walked inside. The moment I stepped through the door, Virginia came at me from the living room. Her face was red with anger, her eyes wild, and she started screaming at me before I'd even closed the door behind me. She was absolutely furious. She demanded to know what the hell I thought I was doing, How I could humiliate her like that in front of all her colleagues. How I'd ruined her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for. She accused me of being vindictive, of trying to destroy her life, of bringing David's wife to a work event just to embarrass her. Her voice was shaking with rage, and she didn't hold back. She called me names, said I was pathetic, and said I'd regret what I'd done. She went on, her anger pouring out in a torrent of accusations and insults. I just stood there in the entryway, arms crossed, and let her yell. I didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend myself, didn't engage with her at all. I just waited. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, and I wasn't going to let her rattle me or make me lose my composure. After what felt like an eternity, Virginia finally started to run out of steam. When she finally stopped talking, and the house fell silent except for the sound of her heavy breathing, I spoke. "I know everything, Virginia," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "I know about you and David. I know about the affair. I've known for weeks. I have proof, photos, messages, receipts, all of it. And I'm done. The marriage is over." Virginia's face changed in an instant. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like I'd just slapped her. All the anger drained out of her, replaced by shock and panic. What are you talking about?" she stammered, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. She knew exactly what I was talking about. "Henry, there's nothing. You're misunderstanding." I cut her off. "Don't," I said firmly. "Don't insult my intelligence by trying to deny it. I have a full report from a private investigator. I have photographs of you and David entering hotels together. I have copies of your text messages. I know everything, Virginia. Every lie you told me. Every time you said you were working late. Every excuse you made. I know it all." Virginia's legs seemed to give out, and she sank onto the couch, her face in her hands. For a moment, she just sat there in silence, and I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what to say, how to respond. Then she looked up at me, and her whole demeanor changed. The anger was gone, replaced by tears and desperation. She started crying as she begged me not to do this, saying she'd end things with David, that we could go to counseling, that we could fix this. She tried every tactic she could think of. She cried and pleaded, reminding me of all the years we'd been together, all the good times we'd had, all the reasons we'd fallen in love in the first place. She told me she still loved me, that David meant nothing, that it was just a stupid mistake she deeply regretted. She promised she'd do anything to make it right, that she'd quit her job, that she'd cut off all contact with David, that she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me if I'd just give her another chance. But I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. I looked at her, this woman I'd been married to for years, and I felt nothing, just a cold, empty detachment. "I can't trust you anymore, Virginia," I said quietly. "You've been having an affair with your boss for months. You lied to me every single day. You made a fool out of me. And now you're only sorry because you got caught, because you know you stand to lose a lot in a divorce." She tried to argue, but I held up my hand to stop her. "The divorce papers will be ready in a couple days," I said, my voice firm. "My lawyer will be in touch. Until then, I'll be staying in the guest room. I don't want to talk about this anymore. There's nothing left to say." Virginia's face crumpled as she cried harder, reaching out for me, but I stepped back. "Please, Henry, please don't do this," she sobbed. "We can work through this. I know we can. Please just give me a chance to." But I was done listening. I turned away from her and walked toward the guest room. Behind me, I could hear her crying, calling my name, begging me to come back and talk to her. But I didn't turn around. I went into the guest room and locked the door behind me. The marriage was over, and as painful as that was, it was also liberating. The divorce papers were finalized and served to Virginia a few days after our confrontation, just as I'd told her they would be. From that point on, the divorce process was long, messy, and emotionally draining. It dragged on for months, with both sides lawyering up and fighting over every detail. Virginia earned significantly more than I did, and with the evidence from the private investigator, the photos, the timeline, the receipts, all of it, she stood to lose a substantial amount in the settlement. My lawyer was aggressive and strategic. using the infidelity to argue for a favorable division of assets and alimony for me. Virginia's lawyer tried to downplay the affair, tried to say that it shouldn't impact the financial aspects of the divorce, but the evidence was too strong. It was clear, documented, and irrefutable. Virginia's career took a significant hit as well. Word of the affair spread through her company like wildfire after the incident at Sandra's party. Everyone knew what had happened. There were whispers, rumors, judgment everywhere she went. The professional reputation she'd worked so hard to build over the years was tarnished, maybe irreparably. She and David tried to keep things professional at work and act as if nothing had happened, but the damage was done. The company's HR department got involved, started asking questions, and launched a formal investigation into whether their relationship had violated any company policies or created conflicts of interest. And then, in a move I didn't see coming but should have, David threw Virginia under the bus. As the rumors intensified and the HR investigation heated up, David started distancing himself from Virginia and spinning the narrative to protect himself. He claimed that Virginia had pursued him aggressively, that he tried to end the relationship multiple times, that he was essentially the victim of a subordinate who wouldn't take no for an answer. It was a complete lie, a cowardly attempt to save his own skin and protect his position in the company. But it worked, at least partially. David was higher up in the company hierarchy, more valuable to the organization, and better connected with the board and other executives. The company decided to take his word over Virginia's. Virginia was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. David, on the other hand, received what amounted to a slap on the wrist, some mandatory ethics training, and a formal note in his personnel file. But he kept his job and his title. Virginia was devastated. She called me multiple times during this period, crying, begging me to help her, to tell HR the truth about what had happened, to corroborate her version of events, and to expose David's lies. But I refused. I had no interest in getting involved in her work drama or fighting her battles for her. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. I wasn't going to bail her out or try to salvage her career. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. Our marriage was over, and what happened to her professionally was no longer my concern. Eventually, Virginia couldn't handle the stigma and the professional fallout anymore. She ended up resigning from her position before the investigation was even completed, unable to face the judgment and the whispers every day. I didn't take any pleasure in her struggles, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. She'd made her choices, and these were the natural consequences. Megan was going through her own divorce process during this same time, and it was just as difficult for her, maybe even more so, because she and David had kids together. There were custody battles, arguments over child support and asset division, all the ugly details that come with ending a long marriage, especially one with children involved. But Megan was strong, stronger than even she realized. She hired a good lawyer, fought for what she deserved, and refused to let David intimidate or manipulate her the way he'd done for years during their marriage. In the end, she got a fair settlement. She kept the family house, received a significant portion of David's assets, and was awarded primary custody of their kids, with David getting visitation rights. David's reputation took a hit, too, though not as much as Virginia's, because he was better at protecting himself and had more institutional support at the company. But people knew what he'd done, and it followed him in social circles and professional networks. My divorce from Virginia was finalized several months after I'd filed the initial papers. It felt like the most extended period of my life, but also like a necessary process of closure and healing. I got a fair settlement in the end, actually more than I'd expected, thanks to my lawyer's aggressive tactics and the strength of the evidence against Virginia. I received a portion of our shared assets, a reasonable alimony arrangement for a few years to help me get back on my feet, and I was able to walk away from the marriage with my finances intact. Virginia, on the other hand, didn't fare nearly as well. She'd lost her high-paying job, taken a significant career hit, and had to pay out a substantial settlement to me. I heard she'd moved to a smaller apartment across town and was trying to rebuild her life and career from scratch. Throughout the divorce process, and in the months that followed, Megan and I remained in close contact. We become genuine friends, bonded by our shared experience of betrayal and our mutual support through the divorce proceedings. A lot of people assumed we were dating, that our friendship had turned romantic, and I could understand why they'd think that. We'd been through so much together that we understood each other in ways few other people could, and there was definitely a deep affection and connection between us. But the truth was, we weren't romantically involved. Maybe someday, but right now I think we both need time to heal, to figure out who we are outside of our failed marriages. I don't want to jump into something new just because we're both hurting and we understand each other. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. We agreed to just remain friends for now, to give ourselves the space and time we needed to move forward and heal truly. I threw myself into my work, took on new challenges and responsibilities. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned. I also started going to therapy, which helped me process the betrayal and the anger and the grief that came with the end of my marriage. It wasn't an easy journey. There were setbacks, dark days where I questioned everything, moments where I felt like I'd never fully recover from what Virginia had done to me. But slowly, gradually, I started to feel like myself again. Not the same person I was before the affair, but someone new, someone stronger and more self-aware, someone who knew his own worth. Looking back on everything that happened, I don't regret any of it. I handled things the way I needed to. I learned who I am when everything falls apart. I realized that I'm stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I realized that I can endure tremendous pain and come out the other side not just surviving, but actually thriving. So that's my story. If you're going through something similar, if you're dealing with betrayal and trying to figure out what to do next, I want you to know that you're stronger than you think. You will survive this. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but you will come out the other side. Focus on yourself, protect your interests, surround yourself with people who genuinely care about you, and don't be afraid to walk away from what's broken. You deserve better. We all do. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.